Adam, I keep hearing people talk about Rashad Khalifa and this so-called Code 19 miracle. A lot of our followers have asked us to explain what it is and what we think about it. Can you break it down for us?
Sure, Omar. Let's start with a brief introduction to who Rashad Khalifa was. Rashad Khalifa was born in 1935 in Egypt, and he moved to the United States in 1959 at around 24 years old, where he pursued advanced studies. He went on to earn a PhD in biochemistry from the University of California, Riverside, and later worked as a biochemist for the U.S. government. His scientific training shaped the analytical way he approached the Quran, which eventually led him, in the late 1970s, to introduce his controversial Code 19 theory. He argued that the Quran is built upon a mathematical structure centered on the number 19, which he saw as a divine stamp confirming its authenticity. We will break down this theory in this video. His ideas attracted both followers and fierce critics. Later, he established a community in Tucson, Arizona, where he led a mosque. In 1990, he was assassinated inside that mosque by extremists who viewed his teachings as heretical. Khalifa was also a Quran-only follower. He believed that the Hadith and Sunnah collections were corrupted by human fabrication and that the Quran alone was divinely preserved and sufficient for guidance.
Yes. I heard he was assassinated by one of his students, a man from Trinidad and Tobago who had begun studying under him in January 1990. He was eventually convicted of murdering Khalifa in 2012 and sentenced to life in prison.
Yes, Omar, that is correct. In 1968, Rashad Khalifa began using computers to analyze the frequency of letters and words in the Quran. He later published his findings in several works, including Miracle of the Quran, Significance of the Mysterious Alphabets in 1973. The Computer Speaks, God's Message to the World in 1981. And Quran, Visual Presentation of the Miracle in 1982. Rashad Khalifa claimed that the Quran contains a built-in mathematical structure based on the number 19, which he referred to as the Quran Code, or more commonly, Code 19. He argued that this numerical system proves the Quran's divine preservation and makes it incorruptible, unlike the Hadith, which he believed was man-made and corrupted.
So explain to us this Code 19 theory in a simple and clear way.
Sure, Omar. I'll explain it in a simple way, without giving any opinions for now. Rashad Khalifa claimed that the Quran is built around the number 19, and that this number functions as a divine signature confirming the Quran's authenticity and preservation. He believed that many structural features of the Quran are mathematically linked to this number. Here is the first core idea. First, he argued the Quran begins with 19. The very first revelation, chapter 96, verse 1, begins with, "Read in the name of your Lord who created." Rashad claimed that the mathematical structure starts here, because according to his method of counting, the first revelation contains 19 letters. Second, Rashad pointed out that the Quran contains 114 chapters, which is 19 times 6. He argued that this numerical pattern is intentional and not a coincidence. Third, he claimed that the phrase Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, contains 19 Arabic letters according to his method of counting. He argued that this phrase serves as the foundational building block of the entire numerical code. Fourth, the mysterious letters at the beginnings of some chapters, like Alif Lam Mim, Taha, Saad, Qaf, etc., are also tied to the number 19 in his theory. These letters appear at the start of 29 chapters. Rashad Khalifa claimed that if you count how often each of those specific letters occurs within its respective chapter, the total will always be a multiple of 19. For example, in the chapter Qaf, he counted the letter Qaf exactly 57 times, which is 19 times 3. This letter counting pattern formed a major part of his overall argument. Fifth, he claimed that the entire structure of the Quran is built on the number 19. According to Rashad Khalifa, multiples of 19 appear throughout the Quran in many forms, including letter counts, word counts, verse totals, chapter lengths, the placement or repetition of certain key words. Sixth, he concluded that the Quran is perfectly preserved. Rashad Khalifa argued that if even a single letter were added or removed, the entire 19 system would break. For him, this mathematical structure served as proof that the Quran had been divinely protected from corruption. He also concluded that Hadith is not part of Islam since it has no numerical structure, no divine mathematical protection, and therefore must be man-made. Finally, Rashad Khalifa claimed that two verses, 128 to 129, from chapter 9 were not originally part of the Quran, because he believed they did not conform to the 19-based pattern. This was one of the main reasons mainstream Muslims rejected his theory completely. His overall conclusion was that the Quran is mathematically structured around the number 19, making it impossible for any human to alter or corrupt it.
So, explain to me clearly how he concluded that verses 128 and 129 of chapter 9 were not originally part of the Quran. I know this claim is the main reason most critics rejected his entire theory. These verses read, "There has certainly come to you a messenger from among yourselves. Grievous to him is what you suffer. He is concerned for you, and to the believers he is kind and merciful. But if they turn away, then say, 'Sufficient for me is Allah. There is no deity except Him. Upon Him I rely, and He is the Lord of the mighty throne.'"
Omar, here's how Rashad Khalifa concluded that verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 were not originally part of the Quran, which is the most controversial part of his theory. His entire system depends on mathematical patterns built around the number 19. According to him, these two verses disrupted several of those patterns. He gave four main reasons. First, he said the letter, Qaf, count no longer fit the 19 pattern. Rashad argued that Surah Qaf, chapter 50, and Surah Ash-Shura, chapter 42, are signed with the letter Qaf. He counted the occurrences of Qaf in the Quran and concluded that the totals aligned with multiples of 19 only if verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 were removed. Because verse 128 contains the word Ro'uf, which includes a Qaf letter, he said this extra letter broke the numerical pattern. Second, he said the total verse count no longer matched his expected 19-base structure. Including these two verses changed the overall number of verses in the Quran in a way that disrupted the numerical sequences he believed must follow multiples of 19. To restore the mathematical structure, he removed them. Third, he said the Basmalah-related calculations broke when the verses were included. Rashad claimed that the entire design of the number of surahs, the number of Basmalahs, the unnumbered Basmalah in chapter 9, and the verse arrangement all followed a 19-base system. When he included verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9, his calculations no longer fit, so he concluded the verses must be later additions. Fourth, he claimed early manuscripts were missing these verses. Rashad also argued that certain early Quranic manuscripts he examined did not contain these two verses, and he used this as historical support for excluding them. In summary, he removed verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 because they disrupted his 19-based numerical theory, not because of widely accepted textual evidence.
I see. Now I understand. So his conclusion about verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 is the main reason his critics reject his entire theory?
Exactly, Omar. His claim that verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 are not part of the Quran is the biggest reason mainstream scholars reject his theory, but it's not the only reason. There are several additional issues that led to widespread rejection. First, his counting method was inconsistent. He sometimes included certain letters, sometimes excluded them, sometimes counted hamzas, sometimes didn't. Critics argued that if the code were truly divine, the rules should be fixed and universal, not adjusted case by case to force a pattern. Second, many of his numerical claims collapse when cross-checked. Independent researchers found that some of his 19 multiples only work using his personal spelling choices, not the standardized Uthmani script used globally today. Once you apply consistent rules, many patterns break. Third, the Quran itself never introduces such a code, nor hints that belief should be based on mathematics. Mainstream scholars saw this as an innovation, something not taught by the Prophet or his companions. Fourth, he built major theological conclusions on the number 19, such as insisting that Hadith must be rejected because they lack numerical coding. Scholars argued that theology cannot be built on numerology. Fifth, many objected to the fact that he used the code to declare himself God's messenger, a claim that took his ideas far outside mainstream Islam. So while removing verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 is the most controversial part, mainstream scholars reject his theory for a combination of mathematical, methodological, and theological reasons.
I see. These reasons make a lot of sense to me, especially the part about him claiming to be God's messenger. That alone raises huge red flags. So what's your final conclusion, Adam?
Omar, after reviewing everything with a calm and objective lens, here is my conclusion. Rashad Khalifa was clearly an intelligent man with a scientific background, and his attempt to analyze the Quran mathematically was ambitious and unique. But intelligence alone does not guarantee truth. His theory has three major problems that make it impossible to accept as a foundation for faith. First, his methods were inconsistent. A divine code should not depend on selective counting, personal spelling preferences, or overlooking certain letters to make the math fit. Truth does not need adjustments. Second, removing verses 128 and 129 from chapter 9 is a catastrophic conclusion. The entire Muslim world, from the earliest manuscripts to every reciter and scholar, preserved these verses. For one man to declare them not Quran because they don't fit his personal numerical model is simply not acceptable. Third, and perhaps most importantly, if he truly were a messenger from God, then his theory would contain absolutely no flaws, contradictions, or mathematical gaps. A messenger cannot present something imperfect or unstable. The very fact that his system breaks down, requires adjustments, and depends on selective counting is itself proof that the claim cannot be true. So what is my conclusion? The Quran is perfect and complete, not because of numerical patterns, but because Allah Himself promised to preserve it. Code 19 may contain some interesting observations, but it cannot be taken as divine proof, and it certainly cannot justify removing verses or declaring new prophethood. For me, my position has always been consistent regarding how I know the Quran is the word of Allah. I know it is divine not because of a numerical code, not because a scholar said so, and not because I trust those who transmitted it. I know it is Allah's word simply because I read it, understood its message, and believed it.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
We're not here to issue fatwas or change anyone's beliefs. These videos simply reflect our own understanding and perspective. Our goal is to inspire you to think, reflect, and read the Quran, just as Allah commanded, and discover the real Islam for yourself.